Okay, the stream is live. Great. Okay, so I am Mary Boyle. I am the program manager here at Hope for HIE. We are here today with Dr. Brian Kalish. He is a neuroscientist and neonatologist at Boston Children's, and he is going to be speaking to us today about his clinical trial with Metformin, which is being used to support brain health in infants with HIE. So welcome, Dr. Kalish. Thank you so much for being here. And I should also mention you are on Hope for HIE's medical advisory board. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Great. Okay, so let's get started. And if anyone is here with us and has any questions, you can type them into the chat. Also, this will be recorded and sent out to all of our different platforms. And if you're watching it and you have a question later, you can always feel free to reach out to me at Hope for HIE. Okay, so let's get started. So Dr. Kalish, can you start by introducing yourself, your background, and your connection to Hope for HIE?
Sure, of course. So as you said, I'm a neonatologist at Boston Children's Hospital. So I spend time caring for babies in our level 4 newborn intensive care unit. And I'm also a neuroscientist. I did all of my training, medical school, residency, fellowship here in Boston. I've spent most of my career here at Boston Children's Hospital. In addition, I spent about 4.5 years at the hospital for 6 children, where I was the director of research in neonatology. So I spend a lot of my time running a research lab that focuses on understanding fetal and neonatal brain injury and trying to develop better therapies for brain injury in babies. And so I'm particularly passionate about HIE and trying to develop therapies beyond therapeutic hypothermia to provide sort of acute protection of the brain, but also promote plasticity and development long after babies suffer HIE. So I also have had the benefit of a long-standing relationship with Hope for HIE. I've been on the medical advisory board for several years, and this year I'm serving as the vice chair of the medical advisory board.
Great, thank you. And is there something, in when you first started, like why HIE?
I think that's probably 2 reasons. One, I think we historically have gotten so much better in neonatology about survival of even our sickest babies. And I think now we need to sort of move beyond survival and ensure that babies can thrive long after they leave the NICU. And I think to thrive and have high quality of life, we need to sort of give them the best opportunity for neurodevelopmental potential that they can possibly have. And I think that's just a huge untapped need, that even after the advent of therapeutic hypothermia, a very large proportion of babies will still have significant long-term disability. And I think that there is this unmet need to develop sort of additional ways that we can support babies' brain development beyond therapeutic hypothermia. So that's really the major reason.
Okay. And then Metformin, am I saying that correctly, Metformin? Okay.
Right, yeah.
So what led you to see that as a potential medication?
Yeah, I think, just philosophically, it stems from an interest in thinking about promoting plasticity after HIE. So plasticity is the ability of the brain to adapt after stress or an injury. And nearly all of the efforts to date for HIE have focused on what I call acute neuroprotection. So what can we do in the hours, days immediately after a baby is born to protect the brain? So in the same time that we would be giving therapeutic hypothermia. So really all of the efforts have focused on those first few hours and days. And I think that's really important. But I think I always tell families with a child with HIE when they're going home that ultimately what happens in the weeks to months after babies go home, and the home environment, being in a loving, enriching context, is at least as important as all the things that we do in the NICU. And I think the reason I say that is because babies are undergoing this incredible period of plasticity where the brain is adapting in that period of weeks to months after birth. And I think what we haven't been able to do yet is be able to intervene, to really help promote or accelerate that plasticity. And I think philosophically that always interested me because it's just an untapped potential there. And so metformin, is a drug that's been around for over 50 years. It's one of the oldest, most studied drugs, that's given to people. It's been used for over 50 years as an anti-diabetic drug. And so there's a wealth of safety data in adults and also in older teens who take metformin. And then within the last decade or so, there's been growing recognition that metformin may have beneficial effects on protecting the brain after injury and providing resilience after injury. This was first noted in adults who were taking metformin and suffered stroke, for instance, that they may have better outcomes than those adults who are not taking metformin. But that's led to a lot of preclinical work, work in animals and mouse models and things like that, show that metformin has lots of beneficial effects on the brain. It can particularly mobilize or sort of enrich the development of neural stem cells after injury, which is really important for sort of repopulating the brain and after a period of injury. But it can also help to reduce inflammation and promote that plasticity that I referred to, that ability at the molecular level for the brain to adapt and sort of rewire after injury. And so now that's been shown in a wealth, dozens and dozens of preclinical animal studies that metformin has that benefit. But then there was emerging data in humans that metformin could also be helpful. And so what really inspired this is that when I was in Toronto, one of my colleagues had led a trial of giving metformin to older children who had suffered brain injury secondary to radiation exposure. There were children with brain tumors who were getting cranial radiation. And they did a pilot study to show safety and feasibility, and actually showed, even in a small cohort, signals of potential benefit of metformin in that population. And that really kind of triggered in my mind and inspired me to think about metformin for babies with HIE.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting that's how it all, is that typical in like clinical research, that there's a drug that's maybe used for one thing and then you can repurpose it and try it into something else?
Yeah, so I think that idea of drug repurposing is particularly attractive here because this is a drug that has a very long safety profile. And so especially when we think about giving it to babies, I think that's a strong advantage. So I think whenever possible, there's a strength there. I do a lot of work to develop other therapies for HIE, but the road to bringing a new drug to market is very challenging. But being able to repurpose something that we know very well, I think has distinct advantages.
Right. So that's, when we talk about the critical need for more medications and therapeutic interventions, this is kind of one of those avenues that we're trying to take using something that we already have.
Exactly. I think the goal in my mind was to take something that is well known, has a generally good safety profile that we have a lot of data on, and be able to bring it to a population that hasn't historically used metformin. So metformin has mostly been given to children, older children, as I said, teenagers, and then in some of these trials to children above the age of 5. But this is really the first study to give it to younger children for this purpose, to sort of promote plasticity after brain injury.
Got it. And this is the only option for a medication-based treatment. There's nothing else that's happening with HIE. It's cooling. And then what would be this?
Yeah. So currently, there are a growing repertoire of interest in trying to develop new therapies for HIE. There's an ongoing industry-sponsored trials and likely others coming soon. And certainly my own work, we were trying to develop other therapies as well. But I think that the distinct importance here is that this is really the only trial that I'm aware of where we're focused on that chronic period of plasticity. As I said, nearly everything else that I'm aware of all focuses on those first few hours to days. But I think that here again, the philosophy is a more sort of chronic medication exposure that would help sort of accelerate and promote that plasticity, long after the initial injury itself. Because I think uniquely in this case, we're starting by giving it to babies who are about 3 months old, and so I think that shows sort of the distinct difference between this and other research endeavors in this space.
Okay, so piggybacking on that, can you share a little bit more about how it works?
Like how the drug works?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So the metformin has a lot of parallel effects on the brain. I think the one key aspect is sort of this, as I said, this mobilization of neural stem cells. So the neural stem cells are the cells in the brain that can divide and differentiate into the other cells, the more mature cells that populate the brain. So that's a really crucial cell population in the developing brain. And so metformin has the ability to sort of mobilize or sort of enrich and expand that pool of this very important stem cell population in the brain. So I'd say that's one. The second is in sort of addressing what we call energetic stress. So really all of the cells in your body need fuel, and how cells process fuel is really important to brain function. And certainly after brain injury, how the cells in the brain can process fuel can become abnormal. And so metformin can help to normalize that. The other sort of mechanism with metformin is that it can help mitigate or reduce neuroinflammation. And so after any brain injury, there can be inflammation in the brain, and that chronic inflammation can be not great in terms of affecting long-term development. And so metformin can help reduce that chronic neuroinflammation. So those are the commonly cited mechanisms for how it potentially helps to promote plasticity after injury.
Okay. And you kind of touched on this a little bit before, just, with this population, the age, how in clinical trials and in this clinical trial do you ensure the safety of this type of trial?
Of course, the safety is paramount first and foremost. I think it's important to say that we engaged very early on with Hope for HIE leadership with Betsy to sort of make sure that we were designing a study that was family centered and something that was appropriate for families with children with HIE, and it's a particularly critical population. We also involved parents who recently had a child with HIE in the design of the trial. So I think those were two really important early components. The trial is overseen and regulated by the FDA. And so we had to receive approval from the FDA to do the study. And so that's an important safety check, because they make sure that we have the appropriate regulations in place to monitor, and that the dosing and the way that we're monitoring patients in the trial prioritizes safety. And so we have to report all of those things to the FDA as part of this process. And then we in this trial, we do monitor the baby's laboratory values, just to make sure that there's no adverse changes that would be unexpected. And because metformin can theoretically affect the blood sugar, we do also ask parents to be monitoring. We give parents a glucometer and to monitor the baby's blood sugar a few times, just around the times that we change doses. That's really out of an abundance of caution. We don't think that metformin should have any adverse effects on any of these lab values, but I think that speaks to how we're making every effort to make sure that there's no safety concerns.
Great.
And I should just say that I think the other safety aspect is that we spent about a year doing computer modeling to determine the appropriate dose to give to babies. I think that's an important aspect of safety is determining what the dose is. So we want a dose that could be helpful, but also minimize any risk of toxicity or safety events. So we really spent a lot of time thinking through that with experts in pharmacokinetic modeling.
Okay. As far as the nitty gritty of the clinical trial, what is the inclusion criteria, the timing of administration, and then like any other key information you think people should know about it?
Sure. So to be included in the trial, these should be babies who are born at term with a diagnosis of HIE and who received therapeutic hypothermia during the neonatal period.
Okay.
They also need to be babies who, in the MRI that's typically obtained after cooling or after hypothermia, showed evidence of brain injury consistent with HIE. And that's really because we know that those are the infants who are at highest risk for having challenges with long-term neurodevelopment. And so we wanted to make sure that we were targeting those infants who had the greatest potential to benefit from the therapy itself. And then we do check a set of labs, liver function and other labs before we start the medication. And we have parameters around liver and kidney function before infants start the medication, just to avoid any safety concerns, of course. And then there are some medications that babies can't be taking if they are taking metformin. They're rather rare and unusual for babies to be taking, so I won't list them here, but we do sort of ensure that there's no potential kind of drug-drug interactions with the metformin in any of the patients. So those are the main criteria. And then babies would start the medication anytime between 3 and 6 months of age. So they can be no older than 6 months, but ideally we'd like to initiate conversations as early as possible with a plan so that we can have that first study visit sometime in between 3 and 6 months.
So when they're enrolled, then what are some of the outcomes you're looking for, and then how long is the enrollment period for them?
Yep. And so in this study, babies take metformin for a total of 12 weeks. And so over that 12-week period, there are 3 study visits here at Boston Children's Hospital. In the first visit, parents and child come and we check that set of study labs. We go over the consent process and do teaching around how to administer the medication, how to monitor for any potential issues. And we also then at that visit give parents the metformin to take home. And so we start the metformin at a low dose, and then we increase the dose or escalate the dose over time. And that's really, again, speaking to your point about safety, sometimes metformin can cause some GI upset. And what we've learned is that if we start lower and then go up, that the medication is much more well tolerated. And so we start low, and then after 3 weeks, we increase the dose. And then so after a total of 6 weeks of taking metformin, they come back for a second study visit. We check in with the parents, review kind of the medication administration again. We check a set of labs just to make sure there are no concerns. And then we give parents a 6-week store of metformin. And then during that second 6 weeks, they're at the full target dosing of metformin. And then they come back at the end of the study, so 12 weeks after beginning, for a final visit to check in at that time. Now, so really the goal of the study is to show that it is feasible to administer the medication. And as part of taking the labs, we're checking levels of metformin in the baby's blood at 6 weeks and 12 weeks to make sure that our model of the appropriate dose is matching what we're seeing in real life.
Okay. So what stage of the trial are you in?
So we just sort of opened the trial a few weeks ago, and we're actually going to be enrolling the first patient in about a week.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah. We're very, very excited. So the goal is to enroll 30 babies in the study. And the idea is that this is really the first step towards, once we show that it's feasible and that we can, monitor the levels of metformin and that they're appropriate, then we ideally would expand the study to look at longer term outcomes.
And who is, just what size team do you have that's working on this?
I'm very grateful to have a clinical research program here at Boston Children's Hospital within the Division of Newborn Medicine,
Okay.
that they really help to support these studies. So we have a team of nurses and other research professionals who really are the backbone of this. I couldn't do this without them.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. So how can families get involved in a clinical trial?
I mean, the best way to get involved in this study is truthfully just to reach out to me directly. So I would welcome that. Folks can just email me directly, and I'm easily Googleable, but you can otherwise we'll provide it as part of
Yes,
this.
I can provide.
My email is probably the best way to reach out, and then we would happy to meet with families by Zoom and discuss the study and assess eligibility for participation and then next steps.
And then is there a plan that you would expand the trial to more sites?
So right now for this, the first study, we're just enrolling at Boston Children's, but welcome families who are willing to travel for those 3 visits to do it at Boston Children's. So parents can come from anywhere that it's possible to come to Boston Children's. But then the hope is in the future for a larger trial that would be multiple centers across the country or the world.
So success at the end of the trial would be what to you?
Yeah. So I think that as I said before, they haven't given metformin to children of this age before, and so I think showing that is feasible and that the dose of metformin we're giving corresponds to levels in the blood that we think that are going to be potentially beneficial for the brain. And so those measurements of those levels are really the key thing that then would support the next steps to be able to do a trial of a much larger number of babies to look at an impact on development. And I think in future studies, we'd ideally like to move the age even younger, because I think the earlier that we can start the metformin, the greater the potential benefit. Giving it earlier and giving it for longer, I think, are the future directions. But because this is the first time it's being given to younger infants, we wanted to keep it to a relatively short duration for that reason.
Sure. I mean, you kind of touched on this then, but if the results are positive, kind of the next steps, and then how do you think this could actually change the standard of care for infants with HIE?
Yeah. I think that in the current era where most babies with HIE are receiving therapeutic hypothermia, the next steps in further promoting the best neurodevelopmental outcomes, I view it as that we're not going to have a silver bullet, like a single agent that's going to change the world and make this much better. I think that we're going to need what I commonly call a cocktail of interventions that are going to move the needle and ultimately change outcomes. So we likely need additional therapies in those first few hours to days in the NICU, and then we also need therapies like metformin that babies can go home on and can take for a longer period of time, sort of targeting each of those windows in the trajectory after brain injury, not just the early period, but also that prolonged period of plasticity that happens for weeks to months. And so my vision is that not that I think that metformin will in and of itself is likely to change the world of HIE, but that it will become a cocktail of interventions that we give that can ultimately optimize the trajectory of that child.
Do you see it impacting any other neurological disorders?
So it's a good question. There are ongoing trials of metformin in many neurological disorders, which is in part what inspired me to think about this for HIE. There's ongoing studies in cerebral palsy, in autism, and other brain injuries that may occur in children. There's also a larger ongoing trial in children who receive cranial radiation for brain tumors. So after that initial study that I mentioned, they're now expanding to a much larger trial. So it's certainly being actively investigated for multiple other sort of brain injury paradigms.
Okay. What role do collaborations between hospitals, researchers, and families play in making a trial like this possible?
I mean, I think as you kind of hinted at, a trial such as this can't happen in a vacuum and is really dependent on so many collaborators. I already mentioned that we're really fortunate from the beginning to partner with parents and families in the design of the trial, which is super critical. And I think I'm a neonatologist, but we have collaborators who are pediatric neurologists, who are pediatric pharmacokinetics experts, collaborators who are endocrinologists who have expertise in the use of metformin. And so I think that building a multidisciplinary team is really necessary for the success of a complex study like this.
Yeah. And is there anything, that like if listeners wanted to hear more, like, is there an update page that you have that they can come to see what's happening?
It's a good question. We don't have an update page yet because we're just opening the trial, but that's a good idea to do. And also, if folks are interested, I can provide you. We have a short YouTube video, sort of a slick 3-minute video that summarizes by me kind of the rationale for the study and what the design is and how to get more information. So that's also another avenue to get information about the study, and I'll send that over.
Great. And is there anything? I didn't have a ton of questions. I wanted you to be able to speak. And is there anything we missed that you think people need to know about this trial or about your work?
No, I think that as I said, we're really passionate about trying to change the outcome of babies with HIE, and ultimately, as I said, it's not going to be a silver bullet. My hope is that this is one arrow in the quill of our armamentarium to be able to help babies with HIE. I think the unique aspects of this study are that we're repurposing a well-known drug with a long history of safety, and that we are focused on the prolonged period of plasticity that occurs after babies go home. So I think those are kind of the unique and novel parts of this study. So we hope that we can also help children with this new approach.
Great. And my final question, are there any of your favorite resources that you wanted to share with anyone listening?
And not beyond the Hope for HIE website. I think that's
the best answer.
Yes, exactly. I did not get prompted to say that, but no, I don't think I don't have any other favorite resources.
Great. Awesome. Okay. Well, we will have this out for everyone to listen to, and we really appreciate your time. And if there's any follow-up questions that we have, I will send them to you, and we will get those answers and takeaways out to everyone.
Wonderful. And as I said, folks should feel free to reach out to me directly. Happy to chat with any parents who have questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Kalish.
Take care.